The evening in Manhattan was electric. Lights flickered across the towering buildings, and the streets hummed with the pulse of a city that never truly slept. At the Grand Opera House, a gala was in full swing. The city's elite had gathered for a celebration of music, art, and philanthropy. Benjamin Hard, accustomed to observing the unnoticed, had been invited not as a guest, but out of curiosity. He had heard whispers of peculiar incidents plaguing the city. Inside the grand hall, the orchestra played with perfect precision, strings and brass weaving a rich tapestry of sound. Guests in formal attire sipped champagne and exchanged polite chatter, entirely unaware of the tension lurking beneath the surface. Benjamin's attention, however, was elsewhere. He scanned the crowd, noting the subtle shifts in posture, fleeting glances, and small gestures that betrayed hidden anxieties. It began subtly. During the third movement, a young lawyer, Thomas Whitaker, seated near the stage, suddenly stiffened. His hand trembled, a sheen of sweat forming on his brow. Benjamin's trained eyes caught the slight flinch before any word or cry could be heard. Whitaker's surroundings seemed to blur as his pupils dilated, and his breathing grew shallow. Those nearby assumed he was simply unwell, perhaps overcome by nerves or the heat of the crowded hall. But Benjamin recognized the signs instantly. Whitaker was experiencing a controlled dissociation, a sudden detachment from reality. He was seeing something the others could not, a vision meticulously orchestrated. The young man's gaze fixed on a spot in the air, his body tensing as if bracing for an impact. And then, in a rapid flash of terror, he convulsed slightly, eyes rolling before he collapsed briefly, only to recover moments later with no visible injury. Guests gasped, some stepping back, while medical personnel rushed forward. Whitaker's account, once coherent, was fragmented, describing a vivid scene of his own death, the orchestra hall catching fire, the chandeliers crashing, and a shadowy figure approaching with malevolent intent. There was no fire, no falling chandeliers, no shadowy figure. Yet every detail in his vision seemed impossibly precise, down to the small cracks in the ceiling and the way light reflected off the polished floors. Benjamin noted something equally strange. Near the site of the incident, on a decorative column, a small, abstract symbol had been etched into the marble. It was nearly imperceptible, a tiny swirl resembling a spiral intertwined with sharp angles. To any casual observer, it was a mere blemish in the stonework, but Benjamin immediately recognized it as a deliberate marker, perhaps left by whoever orchestrated the vision. The opera house director, frantic and confused, demanded answers. The police were baffled. No evidence of chemicals, hypnosis, or any physical tampering was found. The event was pristine, untouched, save for the mysterious symbol. Benjamin, however, felt a surge of anticipation. The puzzle was cerebral, psychological, and undeniably dangerous. Someone had the means to manipulate human perception, inducing vivid, controlled visions with terrifying accuracy. By the end of the night, Benjamin had already begun mapping out possible methods and motives. He considered advanced neurochemical agents, subliminal suggestion, or cutting-edge virtual reality technology adapted for clandestine use. But above all, he knew this was no ordinary criminal. The precision, the timing, the psychological control, it spoke of someone brilliant, meticulous, and obsessed with power over human fear. As he left the gala, Benjamin glanced back at the grand hall, now quiet and emptied of panic. The city thrummed with life outside, oblivious to the invisible threat lingering in its shadows. For Benjamin Hard, the case had begun, and the first vision was only the opening note in a symphony of terror and intellect he would need to unravel. Somewhere in Manhattan, a mind capable of inducing deathly hallucinations was waiting, and Benjamin intended to find it. The morning after the gala, Benjamin Hard returned to his loft. The city outside was alive with routine, completely unaware of the invisible danger that had unfolded the night before. He poured himself a cup of meticulously brewed green tea, letting the steam rise while his mind raced through the details of the first vision. Every nuance, every tremor, every symbol left behind was crucial. Missing one detail could mean losing the thread of the case entirely. Benjamin began by reviewing witness accounts, medical reports, and the fragmentary recollections of Thomas Whitaker. The young lawyer described his death in vivid detail, smoke curling from the chandeliers, shattered glass, and a looming shadow that seemed to move with intent. Hard compared this with the physical environment. Nothing had happened. No smoke, no damage, no intruder. Only Whitaker's perception had been altered, and with such precision that it left him convinced of its reality. Next, Banjamin analyzed the symbol etched into the marble column. He photographed it, sketched its angles, and compared it with known patterns from historical occult symbolism, cryptography, and artistic codes. Nothing immediately matched, but its deliberate design suggested a signature, a calling card left by someone who took pride in their precision. The spiral intersecting sharp angles could indicate a psychological message, something designed to resonate with the human subconscious. Banjamin considered the method. Could it be chemical? Some kind of aerosolized hallucinogen capable of inducing vivid visual and auditory experiences? But the logistics seemed improbable. The opera hall was large, and no trace of substances was detected in air filtration or on surfaces. Could it be technological? Perhaps a highly advanced projection or neural interface device used in secret. Hard knew the city housed some of the brightest minds and most experimental tech, and a rogue individual could exploit this for nefarious purposes. He began mapping potential suspects. The first category included event staff, those who could access the hall before the gala, plant devices, or tamper with environmental controls. The second category encompassed anyone with advanced knowledge of human perception, neuropsychology, or experimental technology. The final category, most troubling, included someone capable of anticipating human behavior to an extraordinary degree, a manipulator of fear itself. To test his theories, Banjamin visited the opera house in the daylight. He examined lighting fixtures, air vents, and acoustics. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet he noted subtle inconsistencies, slight irregularities in ceiling panels, faint marks near speakers, and the way certain shadows fell under natural light. Each observation was catalogued meticulously. He began to wonder if the perpetrator had left additional markers, something designed to guide a skilled observer toward the next clue. Banjamin also considered the victims. Whitaker had been chosen deliberately, a young lawyer with high stress, susceptible to suggestion, and likely to describe his experience vividly to authorities. Was the arsonist, or whatever manipulator this was, testing methods before escalating? Or was this part of a larger, more intricate plan? The psychological precision required to orchestrate such an event suggested not just brilliance, but obsession. As the day drew on, Banjamin compiled a timeline, moments of exposure, details remembered by Whitaker, and potential points of intervention. Every fact, every irregularity, was a potential threat. He understood the case demanded a combination of detective work, behavioral analysis, and technological insight. Someone in Manhattan was playing with minds as if they were instruments, and Banjamin was determined to stop them before the next note in their deadly symphony played out. By evening, Banjamin had mapped likely scenarios, narrowed potential suspects, and prepared for his next move, observing the city through a lens of human perception, searching for subtle distortions, and tracing the invisible fingerprints of someone who manipulated reality itself. The city slept peacefully, yet the danger was real, precise, and calculated. Banjamin Hard knew that to catch this adversary, he would need to think like the unseen composer of terror, predicting the next vision before it could strike. The following days brought little relief to Manhattan. Banjamin Hard, ever observant, studied the subtle tremors of the city, seeking patterns invisible to most. After the first incident at the Grand Opera House, more cases surfaced, smaller gatherings, private parties, and even corporate events. Each victim experienced the same terrifying vision of their own death, yet all survived physically unscathed. The symbols left behind grew slightly more elaborate, but the spiral-sharp pattern persisted. Banjamin began mapping these events on a city grid. Red dots marked the locations, connected by imagined lines and arcs. As he traced them, an unsettling geometry emerged. The dots formed subtle triangles, intersecting lines, and radial patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. He hypothesized that the locations were chosen not at random, but with precision, like pieces of a hidden design only visible from a broader perspective. He revisited the victims' accounts. Each described the visions with uncanny consistency, the sensations of falling, of being struck, and of shadowy figures moving with deliberate intent. Banjamin compared them against environmental conditions at the time, lighting, temperature, sound, and found nothing unusual. This was no simple trick of light or sound. The perpetrator had found a way to manipulate perception itself. Interviews with surviving victims revealed subtle clues. One woman recalled a faint scent of iron mixed with lavender during her vision, while another mentioned a low hum she could not identify. Banjamin catalogued these sensory anomalies meticulously. Each minor detail became a potential key, a thread connecting the incidents into a coherent, if disturbing, pattern. Hard turned his attention to the symbols. He noticed slight variations, as if the spiral's angle or the sharpness of its edges conveyed additional information. Perhaps they represented timing, target selection, or even psychological triggers. He photographed and measured each marking, preparing to compare them for mathematical or cryptographic correlations. The evidence suggested an intellect both creative and obsessive, someone who viewed human minds as instruments to be played. A breakthrough came when Banjamin overlaid the map of events with the city's architectural features. All incidents occurred near locations with strong acoustic properties, concert halls, museums, or buildings with resonant chambers. The pattern suggested the perpetrator relied on sound or vibration to enhance the perception of the vision. Perhaps the technique combined psychological conditioning with subtle sonic stimuli, designed to manipulate the brain into constructing vivid hallucinations. Banjamin also considered motive. Were the victims connected by a personal grievance? Or was this an elaborate experiment, a demonstration of control over human perception? The pattern suggested planning on a large scale, testing responses and refining methods. He realized the perpetrator would escalate if not stopped, targeting higher-profile individuals or public spaces to increase impact. By the end of the week, Banjamin had identified a critical connection. Every location could be linked to a single influential individual in Manhattan, a tech entrepreneur with access to advanced experimental equipment and a fascination with human cognition. The name alone sent a shiver through Banjamin. Whoever this person was, they had the resources, intelligence, and audacity to manipulate reality itself, and the stakes were escalating. As night fell, Banjamin reviewed his notes. The patterns were clear, but incomplete. The next incident could occur anywhere, yet the geometric map gave him a framework. He knew the solution would require combining psychology, physics, and precise observation. Somewhere in the shadows of Manhattan, the manipulator was preparing their next move, and Banjamin Hart intended to be ready. Banjamin Hart spent the next morning at his loft, studying his growing map of incidents. The geometric patterns, the recurring symbols, the victims' testimonies, all pointed toward a calculated mind orchestrating events with chilling precision. But knowledge alone would not catch the manipulator. Observation in real time was essential. Banjamin needed to see the perpetrator's methods firsthand. He began by identifying potential locations for the next incident. Using patterns from previous events, he pinpointed venues with specific architectural acoustics, high-profile attendees, and subtle vulnerabilities. One candidate was the Street Cecilia Museum, hosting a private gala for elite donors. The combination of crowd density, structural acoustics, and the presence of influential individuals made it an ideal target for the perpetrator. Banjamin arrived early, posing as a patron with an interest in art and music. He moved quietly among the staff and early guests, noting routines, security measures, and lighting. His keen eyes picked up subtle cues, the angle of a security camera, a faint reflection in the polished marble, and the slight misalignment of an ornamental fixture. Each observation suggested that the perpetrator had intimate knowledge of the venue. Hours passed, and the gala began. Guests mingled, unaware of the silent danger. Banjamin focused on individuals exhibiting unusual behavior, subtle glances, erratic movements, and moments of tension that might indicate access to restricted areas. His instincts, honed over years of investigation, guided him toward a figure in a dark suit, standing near a rear balcony. The man appeared inconspicuous, yet Banjamin noted a peculiar focus in his eyes, a tension in his posture. Then it happened, a guest, a young pianist, suddenly froze mid-step. Her expression shifted from joy to sheer terror. Banjamin recognized the classic signs: dissociation, altered perception, and acute physiological stress. He observed her eyes, dilated and fixed on a point above the balcony, while her body trembled subtly. Someone was initiating the next vision. Banjamin acted. He traced the angle of the victim's gaze, identifying the source, the man on the balcony manipulating light, shadows, and possibly subtle acoustic signals. Moving silently, Hard positioned himself to observe without alerting the perpetrator. Every micro-movement, every gesture of the manipulator, became data in Banjamin's mental map of the operation. Through careful observation, he identified the tools used, a combination of reflective surfaces, directional sound emitters, and concealed projectors. The manipulator had engineered a system capable of inducing vivid hallucinations, exploiting human sensory perception. Banjamin documented every detail, knowing that catching the culprit would require both understanding the technology and predicting the human element. As the gala ended, Banjamin followed the figure discreetly, noting routes, exits, and interactions with staff. He saw subtle hints of arrogance. The perpetrator was confident, precise, but unaware of being watched by someone equally sharp. Each step confirmed Banjamin's suspicion: the manipulator was meticulous, technologically adept, and psychologically sophisticated. Returning to his loft, Banjamin reviewed his observations, sketches, and notes. The pattern was becoming clearer, but the human factor remained unpredictable. The manipulator's next move would escalate, and Hard had to anticipate both method and target. One thing was certain: whoever controlled these visions underestimated Banjamin's ability to see through illusions. By nightfall, Banjamin had prepared for the next observation. He knew the key was patience, precision, and understanding the psychology behind the fear. The city thrummed below, oblivious to the silent battle unfolding above it. Somewhere in Manhattan, the manipulator plotted their next vision, but Banjamin Hard would be ready, the silent observer in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to intervene. Banjamin Hard returned to his loft, the city lights twinkling through the panoramic windows, and pored over his extensive notes. Each vision, each symbol, each subtle anomaly from the previous incidents formed a puzzle he had yet to solve. The abstract markings left at the crime scenes were not random, they were a coded system, a deliberate method of communication from the manipulator. He began by cataloging the symbols in sequence, photographing and measuring every angle, every curve, and every line. Using graph paper and digital overlays, Banjamin attempted to detect geometric patterns, frequencies, and proportions. He noticed a subtle variation: the spiral's rotation correlated with the intensity of the victim's responses, while the sharp angles indicated directionality, possibly guiding attention or indicating points of manipulation. Next, Banjamin analyzed the timing of each incident. The manipulator had chosen specific moments, often during crescendos of music or key social interactions, when victims were most susceptible. Banjamin realized the patterns combined environmental, psychological, and technological elements. The symbols could be keys to understanding when, where, and how the visions were induced. He cross-referenced the symbols with the architectural layouts of the affected locations. Some markings aligned with sound reflection points, hidden corners, or areas where light refracted in a certain way. It became clear that the manipulator's design leveraged physics as much as psychology. The city itself was part of the code. Banjamin also considered the victims. Each had a unique profile: stress levels, sensory sensitivity, and prior experiences influenced their response. By comparing these profiles with the corresponding symbols, he began to notice subtle correlations. Certain spiral angles consistently affected highly visual individuals, while sharp intersections targeted those more attuned to sound. The manipulator's understanding of human perception was extraordinarily precise. To test his theories, Banjamin replicated elements of the environment in a controlled setting. Using a combination of mirrors, sound emitters, and subtle visual cues, he induced mild but measurable perceptual shifts in volunteers. The experiments confirmed his hypothesis: the symbols were more than decoration, they were operational guides, encoding the manipulator's methods. With the code partially deciphered, Banjamin identified potential patterns for future incidents. He mapped likely locations, calculated optimal times, and predicted the manipulator's next move. One location stood out: an exclusive gallery hosting a night of experimental music and light installations. The combination of audience, acoustics, and visual stimuli matched previous incidents with alarming precision. Banjamin prepared a strategy. Observation alone would not suffice, intervention required precision, timing, and anticipation. He would need to monitor the location discreetly, document any technological devices, and anticipate the manipulator's psychological cues. Failure was not an option. The next vision could target someone more vulnerable or, worse, escalate into physical danger. As he packed his equipment, cameras, sound recorders, portable analyzers, Banjamin reflected on the mind behind the operation. Brilliant, meticulous, and obsessed, the perpetrator was playing with human perception as if it were an instrument. But even brilliance had limits. The code had cracks, patterns that a trained eye could see, and Banjamin Hard intended to exploit every one of them. The city outside moved on in its usual rhythm, unaware of the invisible battle unfolding among its streets, galleries, and concert halls. Banjamin Hard, ever vigilant, prepared to follow the manipulator into the next scene, confident that understanding the code was the first step towards stopping the psychological terror that had gripped Manhattan. Banjamin Hard arrived at the exclusive gallery just before dusk. The city outside buzzed with evening energy, oblivious to the silent game about to unfold within the walls of the venue. The gallery, known for its avant-garde exhibitions, was hosting a combination of experimental music and light installations, a perfect environment for the manipulator's next vision. Banjamin had studied the layout carefully, noting vantage points, exits, and areas where sound and light could be controlled. He moved discreetly among early arrivals, posing as a guest with a professional interest in the exhibit. His eyes scanned constantly, noting each detail: the placement of speakers, the reflections from polished floors, the alignment of projectors, and subtle irregularities in ceiling panels. Every small anomaly was a potential signature of the perpetrator's method. As the performance began, Banjamin observed a guest, a young violinist, taking her place on stage. Minutes later, she stiffened mid-step, her eyes widening as if confronted with an invisible force. Banjamin recognized the signs instantly: dissociation, rapid heartbeat, and pupil dilation. The signature spiral symbol was etched into a nearby decorative panel, its presence subtle yet unmistakable. Someone had initiated the next vision. Banjamin acted with precision. He traced the victim's line of sight and pinpointed the source: a figure partially obscured by shadows near a rear balcony. The man was manipulating light, reflections, and possibly sound, orchestrating the young violinist's perception. Banjamin moved silently, documenting the devices and capturing angles without alerting the manipulator. The scene escalated. The violinist's vision intensified, shadows deepened, lights flickered, and she appeared to see an entirely fabricated disaster. Banjamin stayed close, ready to intervene if physical danger arose, but primarily focused on observation. He noted the technology used: directional speakers, tiny projectors, and reflective surfaces combined with precise timing. The manipulator had engineered a system capable of inducing terrifying hallucinations with surgical accuracy. Banjamin also observed behavioral cues from the perpetrator. Small gestures, glances toward specific spots, and micro-adjustments of devices revealed a pattern. The manipulator's movements were deliberate, rehearsed, and confident. Yet, despite the precision, the intruder remained unaware of Banjamin's presence, an error the detective intended to exploit. As the performance reached its climax, Banjamin used the information he had gathered to anticipate the manipulator's next adjustment. He subtly repositioned himself to block the line of sight, monitored the devices, and prepared to confront the perpetrator. The tension was palpable, every second mattered. The violinist, though terrified, was unharmed physically, and the manipulator had yet to notice Benjamin's silent intervention. When the performance ended, Benjamin followed the figure discreetly through service corridors and emergency exits. He noted escape routes, interactions with staff, and additional devices left behind, evidence of meticulous planning and arrogance. The manipulator's pattern, now partially exposed, provided Benjamin with the framework to predict future actions. Returning to his loft that night, Benjamin reviewed his observations and photographs. The trap had worked. He had documented the manipulator's methodology in detail and confirmed that the symbols and devices were integral to the visions. The psychological and technological elements were intertwined, revealing a mind both brilliant and obsessed. Benjamin poured himself a cup of green tea and reflected on the events. Manhattan slept, blissfully unaware of the near misses and invisible manipulations that had occurred. Somewhere in the city, the manipulator was planning the next vision, confident in their unseen power. But Benjamin Hard had seen the strings, mapped the patterns, and would be ready. The trap had been set, and the next confrontation was imminent. The next morning, Benjamin Hard spread out his notes across the large oak table in his loft. Photographs, sketches, and maps of Manhattan's incidents covered every inch of the surface. Each line, symbol, and victim's account formed a complex web, but patterns were beginning to emerge. The manipulator's meticulous planning was now traceable, at least in part, and Benjamin knew that cracking the identity of the person behind the visions required combining behavioral insight with technological deduction. He started with the victims. Carefully cross-referencing their occupations, routines, and personal histories, Benjamin noticed a subtle link. All had interactions with a single influential figure, Dr. Leonard Firth, a neuroscientist and tech entrepreneur known for cutting-edge research in human perception and cognitive enhancement. Firth had recently hosted private demonstrations involving experimental devices designed to enhance sensory input, though officially only under controlled lab conditions. Benjamin dug deeper. Public records, academic publications, and interviews with colleagues revealed that Firth had an obsession with manipulating perception, often testing hypothetical scenarios and theoretical models on volunteers. His methods were controversial, raising ethical questions, but no one had suspected criminal intent. The evidence so far suggested he could be the architect of the visions, but Benjamin knew accusations required proof, not speculation. Next, he analyzed the symbols left at each incident. Comparing them to Firth's work, Benjamin noted correlations. The spiral-sharp designs mirrored diagrams in Firth's unpublished research papers on neural patterning and perception control. The variations in the symbols matched specific experimental parameters, suggesting that whoever left them was familiar with both advanced neuroscience and practical implementation. This pointed directly to someone with intimate knowledge of Firth's experiments, possibly Firth himself. Benjamin also considered psychological traits. The manipulator exhibited obsession, precision, and a desire to control fear. They left clues deliberately, almost taunting their observer. Benjamin understood this behavior. It reflected not only intellect but ego, a compulsion to demonstrate superiority. Firth's reputation for brilliance and public confidence aligned with this profile. To confirm his suspicions, Benjamin set up surveillance near Firth's private lab. Observing from a distance, he noted patterns of comings and goings, interactions with assistants, and moments when experimental devices were moved or adjusted. Subtle signs emerged: small, deliberate alterations to equipment, shadowy figures entering the lab at unusual hours, and traces of reflective surfaces and miniature projectors similar to those used at the gallery and opera house incidents. Benjamin began constructing a psychological trap. By predicting Firth's obsessive tendencies, he planned to lure him into a controlled environment where the manipulator could be observed and documented without endangering innocent participants. Every detail mattered: timing, placement, and the selection of witnesses were all critical. One wrong move could allow Firth to escape or escalate his experiments further. By nightfall, Benjamin had built a comprehensive profile: Leonard Firth, age 42, tech-savvy, brilliant, ego-driven, obsessed with human perception, and likely craving validation for his experimental prowess. He now had a working hypothesis of the methods used to induce visions, the motives behind them, and a predicted next location. The manipulator's patterns had exposed their mind, and Benjamin Hard was ready to confront it. As he reviewed the collected evidence, Benjamin allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The pieces were aligning, and the endgame was approaching. Manhattan remained unaware of the invisible hand controlling fear, but Benjamin was on the cusp of unmasking the mind behind the terror. Soon, the manipulator would be revealed, and the city would finally breathe freely again. Benjamin Hard arrived at the isolated warehouse on the outskirts of Manhattan just as dusk painted the sky in deep amber and violet. Based on his meticulous observations and analysis of Firth's patterns, he knew this location would host the next experiment. The building, a repurposed industrial facility, had been chosen for its acoustics and isolation, providing the perfect controlled environment for the manipulator's psychological and technological experiments. Benjamin moved with his usual precision, remaining in the shadows, his trained eyes scanning every corner, every reflective surface, and every potential vantage point. Inside, he could see the faint outline of equipment arranged strategically, directional speakers, reflective panels, and concealed projectors. The setup mirrored the previous incidents, but this time, Benjamin had prepared a counter-strategy to observe without risking innocent participants. From his concealed position, he saw Firth enter, moving with an almost ritualistic focus. The manipulator's confidence was palpable, each gesture deliberate, reflecting hours of rehearsal and obsession with precision. Benjamin noted the subtle signs, the tilt of Firth's head, the positioning of his fingers on a control panel, the minute adjustments to sound and light, that indicated he was about to initiate the next vision. Benjamin's plan was to allow Firth to begin, documenting every action and device while ensuring no victim would experience uncontrolled effects. Using portable sensors and discrete cameras, Benjamin monitored the environment. As the manipulator activated the equipment, shadows shifted unnaturally, and a low hum resonated through the warehouse. The technology created a convincing sensory illusion, but Benjamin's preparation ensured safety while preserving the authenticity of the experiment. Finally, Firth noticed something amiss, the subtle movements of someone observing, the slight misalignment in reflections he had not accounted for. His eyes scanned the shadows, and he froze, recognizing the presence of an observer as acute as himself. Benjamin stepped out of the concealment, calm and deliberate, making his entrance known. "Dr. Leonard Firth," Benjamin said evenly, "I believe you've been conducting more than mere experiments. The visions, the symbols, they're all yours." Firth's expression shifted from surprise to a calculating glare. "And you are?" he asked, his voice composed but edged with tension. "Benjamin Hard," he replied. "You've underestimated the human element. You may control perception, but you cannot escape observation." For a tense moment, neither man moved. Firth's mind raced, calculating escape routes and countermeasures, while Benjamin stood firm, a steady presence amidst the chaos of technology and illusion. Then, in a subtle but decisive move, Benjamin disabled several key devices, ensuring the environment could no longer manipulate perception without risk. The manipulator's advantage was neutralized. Firth realized he had been outmaneuvered. The brilliance that had allowed him to orchestrate visions across Manhattan was met with equal intellect, discipline, and observation. Benjamin approached cautiously, securing photographic and physical evidence of the devices and the symbols, each piece critical for the final understanding of the case. As police backup arrived, summoned discreetly by Benjamin earlier, Firth had no choice but to surrender. The manipulator, once unseen and untouchable, was finally confronted and contained. Manhattan's psychological landscape, disturbed by weeks of engineered fear, began to stabilize. The city had narrowly avoided escalation, and the intricate puzzle had been solved through observation, deduction, and calculated patience. Returning to his loft that night, Benjamin reflected on the confrontation. The mind behind the terror had been revealed, and its methods documented. As he catalogued the recovered devices and photographed symbols for his collection, Benjamin Hard allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another case closed, another challenge met, and yet, the city would never truly sleep without him watching, analyzing, and anticipating the invisible threats lurking in the shadows. The news of Leonard Firth's arrest spread quickly through Manhattan. Headlines spoke of a brilliant neuroscientist whose experiments had crossed ethical boundaries, producing vivid hallucinations that terrified the city's elite. Public reaction was a mixture of fascination and horror. But for Benjamin Hard, the case was far from over. Catching Firth had been only one step, understanding the full scope of his manipulations and their repercussions was equally crucial. Benjamin returned to his loft, spreading out photographs, diagrams, and recovered devices on his oak table. Each piece told a story of meticulous planning, precision, and psychological insight. The directional speakers, reflective panels, and miniature projectors were carefully designed to exploit the brain's perception of light, sound, and spatial awareness. Combined with the manipulator's knowledge of the victim's vulnerabilities, the result was a seamless illusion of life-threatening events. He began analyzing the aftermath on the victims. Though physically unharmed, many reported lingering anxiety, fear of crowded spaces, and flashbacks to their visions. Benjamin knew the psychological impact could persist for months, if not years. He contacted therapists and psychologists familiar with trauma induced by intense hallucinations, ensuring that the victims received appropriate support. The manipulator's influence had reached far beyond the isolated incidents, it had left a subtle but dangerous imprint on the minds of those affected. Next, Benjamin examined Firth's motives and methods. While the manipulator had sought control over perception, there was also an undeniable craving for recognition. The symbols etched at each location, the careful orchestration of settings, and the timing of each vision revealed a compulsion to showcase intellectual superiority. Benjamin noted the obsession with precision and ego-driven satisfaction, traits that had guided Firth's actions and, ultimately, his undoing. Benjamin also reflected on the larger implications. The city itself had become a laboratory, a canvas for experiments blending technology and psychology. The ethical breach was profound, highlighting the thin line between genius and criminality. While the authorities focused on legal consequences, Benjamin considered the broader lesson: even the most sophisticated manipulations could be detected and countered with observation, patience, and a methodical mind. He spent days cataloging evidence for law enforcement and documenting every detail for his own records. The recovered devices were dismantled, analyzed, and stored carefully. Each symbol, each mark, and each recorded experiment was meticulously logged. For Benjamin, this process was not only about solving the case, it was about preserving knowledge, understanding human behavior, and preparing for threats yet unseen. As he reviewed his notes one evening, Benjamin allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The case had tested every skill he possessed: observation, deduction, psychological analysis, and strategic planning. Firth had been brilliant, but Benjamin's understanding of human perception and behavior had been superior. The manipulator's network of illusions had collapsed under the weight of methodical scrutiny. Finally, Benjamin placed the first recovered symbol from the gallery into his collection, a small, abstract spiral etched in marble. It was a tangible reminder of the intricate mind he had confronted, the invisible threat he had neutralized, and the enduring truth that intelligence alone was never enough to triumph over careful observation. With the case closed and the city slowly returning to normal, Benjamin Hart prepared for whatever challenge would emerge next, knowing that the shadows of Manhattan always hid secrets waiting to be uncovered. The city of Manhattan gradually returned to its usual rhythm, unaware of the psychological chaos that had rippled through its elite circles. For Benjamin Hart, the conclusion of Leonard Firth's case marked both relief and reflection. The manipulator's reign of meticulously crafted terror had ended, but the lessons and lingering effects would stay with him, and with the city, for some time. Benjamin began by finalizing his records. Every photograph, sketch, and measurement from the recovered devices and symbols was catalogued with meticulous care. The directional speakers, miniature projectors, and reflective panels had been disassembled and studied. He noted the technical ingenuity behind each apparatus, but more importantly, he documented the psychological principles Firth had exploited. The case was a rare intersection of intellect, technology, and human behavior, one that would provide insights for years to come. He visited several of the victims, ensuring that their recovery was proceeding as expected. While their physical safety had never been in jeopardy, the emotional scars were evident: anxiety, unease in crowds, and the occasional flashback to the hallucinations they had endured. Banjamin provided calm guidance, encouraging them to view the experience as a test of resilience rather than a mark of weakness. Each interaction reinforced his understanding of human perception and the complex ways fear could be manipulated. Back in his loft, Banjamin examined the remaining evidence from the gallery and opera house incidents. The symbols, spirals intersecting sharp angles, were subtle, almost elegant in their precision. They represented not just Firth's manipulative power but also his ego, his obsession with control and observation. Banjamin often wondered about the mind capable of orchestrating such events, and in the careful study of those symbols, he found a mix of fascination and caution. Finally, he reached for the small marble fragment from the gallery, the spiral marking that had first signaled Firth's method. With deliberate care, he added it to his collection, a tangible memento of a mind as brilliant as it was dangerous. Each piece in his collection told a story, a challenge overcome, a puzzle solved, a threat neutralized. This fragment would now serve as a reminder of the intricate battle he had faced and won. Banjamin poured a cup of green tea, letting the steam rise and filling the loft with its delicate aroma. He gazed at the Manhattan skyline, lights shimmering like distant stars. The city moved on, oblivious to the invisible threats that had once controlled perception and fear. But for Banjamin, vigilance was perpetual. He knew that somewhere, in the shadows, the next challenge waited: another mind, another puzzle, another test of observation and intellect. As he settled into his chair, the piano keys nearby catching the soft glow of lamplight, Banjamin reflected on the journey. The case had tested every facet of his skill: analytical reasoning, psychological insight, and careful observation. Yet through patience, attention to detail, and a deep understanding of human behavior, he had prevailed. The manipulator had been unmasked, the city's elite restored to safety, and another chapter in his career concluded with precision and clarity. Banjamin Hard, ever watchful, sipped his tea and allowed a rare, fleeting smile. Another case closed, another lesson learned, another artifact added to his ever-growing collection. The city slept, but he remained alert, a silent guardian in a world where perception and reality could be manipulated with terrifying accuracy. And somewhere in Manhattan, shadows still held secrets, waiting for the one mind capable of unveiling them.